Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on May 8th, 2025, and you are tuning in for day 4 of the 5-day executive director training with your instructor, Cheryl Cosley, who's principal of Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the training and development specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're always grateful when you join us for one of our webinars. Just a quick disclaimer, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. You will hear Cheryl make reference to a list of reference items that she put together for you. There's like 33 of them, I believe. It's too many links for me to kind of put into the chat, but I want you to know that all of those are there for you in the courses section here on the learning platform. Just go to courses and go to executive director training. And while you thumb through that course, there's going to be 2 full pages of links. They're all labeled with what they are. And then Cheryl even put together a list of what the resources each contain. So that's all for you right there in the courses section when you hear her reference that. If you have joined and you're unable to hear out of the proper device that you want, maybe you're trying to use your headphones, maybe you're meaning to use a speaker, you can pull up a list of your speaker and your mic devices by clicking on that telephone icon. And then you can go through and kind of select what's the right audio output that you want to use. We do encourage participation during the webinars. We love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions. We'll primarily rely on the use of the public chat. So some of you might already have it expanded. If you don't, you can go up there to the messages menu and click on public chat. And then whatever you want to say or ask, just click in that box that says send message to public chat. And then you can hit enter, or you can click on the cute little paper airplane button and that'll send it in. Most questions are going to end up getting answered through Cheryl's presentation. But if you want to send it into the chat just to kind of have it there, know that she will review those at the end as well. If you go into the shared notes section, you'll find a list of important links. I did put a link to today's presentation slides in the chat for you already, but there's also a link to the webinar feedback survey, a link to the recordings of the previous days, registering for our newsletter, different things like that. So something to check out when you have a moment. And then if you have any tech support problems, you can ask me to help you within the chat. I'm happy to help you navigate that. And if you think we maybe missed something along the way, you could use that hand raise feature to draw our attention to the chat. We'd love it, though, if you let us know who all is present in today's webinar by introducing yourselves in the chat. We can kind of make sure that's working. So just take a moment. You can let us know what your name is, where you're tuning in from, your work or your role in Indian country that most likely led you to this webinar series, and then your tribal affiliation, if you have one. You might be a tribal employee and not have one. That's okay, too. All right, folks, while you're introducing yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor, Cheryl Cosley. And Cheryl, I have made you presenter now.
Thank you very much. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming back for day 4. Hopefully you're learning a little bit of something that'll help you out. Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Cosley. You know that by now. I am from Bay Mills, Kenosha in my name. Or in my language, it's the place of the pike. We're from the Bay Mills Indian Reservation, and our waters actually border Canada. I served for 28 years as the director of housing for my tribe. During that time, I also served as the chairwoman of the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association for 7 years. That's the 31 tribes surrounding the Great Lakes. And I served on the board for the National American Indian Housing Council. I started as their secretary, became a vice chair, and then eventually a 2-term chair. So I did 16 years on the national level in housing. So I've got quite a bit of experience. I've been providing TNTA just like this, virtually and in person, throughout the lower 48 and Alaska since 2019. So I'm very blessed that since 1990, I've been in housing and been able to help our people all the way through, all over the place. And I very much enjoy that. It's a subject that absorbs a lot of my heart. So thank you for being here. I hope you do learn something. If you ever need anything, my information is at the beginning and at the end of the presentation. Feel free to reach out to me and I will try to answer you. The objectives, again, were to cover the key roles and responsibilities of an executive director and your administrative requirements necessary for implementation and program oversight to make sure that you're compliant. And we went through on the first day and talked about, what are your tools? Your tools are the HUD printed materials that you get. And then there is the NAHASDA statute. That's the first place you're going to go, is NAHASDA statute. Then the regulations you find at 24 CFR 1000. And then part 200, which is the administrative requirements. Those are used by your tribe also, and they're used for non-tribal purposes. So they're put out, by the Office of Management and Budget and some other people throughout Washington, D.C. So those aren't written specifically for us. So they're almost, in my mind, the most difficult for us to use, but we need to. And our tribe uses them also. We're considered a non-federal entity. And your procurement policy could be just the same as your tribe's. And it will govern basically all things finance, procurement, your allowable expenses, your audits, different areas like that. So you have to also utilize that particular document, as well as we need to get on Code Talk. Please, if you're a director, get on there at least once a week. Hit the PIH notices, see if there's anything new. Look at the program guidances, see if there's anything new, and then go to the Dear Tribal Leader Letter section. I always stutter over that word. And that's where they publish the rest of the information that we really need. And then there's a lot of things that will help you, but you need to be aware of anything that comes out of the box, because that's the only way you're going to find out. Okay, so please, if you get nothing out of this course, get that. And then these reference materials, as she said, I think there's 31 of them. There's your statute, there's your regulations, there's your uniform administrative requirements there. Your HUD income limits, I keep getting on there trying to see. New ones should be coming any day now. So you should be checking for those. And then all those other ones we've talked about over the course of, these 5 days. Tomorrow we'll be still talking about some of these. So there's 33 of them. Please utilize those. So lease requirements, we're going to talk about those: inspections, collections, research, maintenance, your types of maintenance, your current assisted stock unit maintenance, your NAHASDA unit, your move outs and things like that. And your procurement, your requirements, your standards, and those different types of procurement, conflict of interest in many areas. And then those useful life, your TDC, your total development cost, and local cooperation agreements. So if you do any building, this is all going to kick in. If you offer modernization monies, rehab monies, things like that, your useful life and binding commitments are also going to kick in. So it's kind of important that you make sure you have that mechanism in place. And then if you do any building again, Davis-Bacon, your other labor requirements, tribal prevailing wage rates, and then understanding that local ONAP office, the mission and organization. I had no clue for years and years how that was set up. Hopefully that'll give you a little bit of insight. And then we'll end up, talking about the Title 6 loan guarantee program and the 184 program is how we'll end tomorrow, as well as some lease requirements that we're going to start out with right now. Okay, so stay tuned. Hope you learned something and enjoy the class. Lease requirements. So your inspections, we harped about that during the APR yesterday. They want your boots in every single unit that you own at least once a year. The move-in inspection counts. The move-out inspection counts, and any inspections in between. But you have to make sure that you are maintaining the properties that you've, built with those federal funds, or were built with federal funds, whether you built them or not. That applies also to mutual help units, lease to own units, things like that, because if they are actively within your program and let's say it's a 20-year period and they're in the 19th year and something happens and they're not compliant anymore, you have to go back and fix that house all the way up, to brand new again and find another eligible participant. It behooves you to make sure that you're making sure that the house is not totaled along the way. Do you know how much damage could be done during that period of time? So we are basically responsible when we give money to make sure, that the product that we help with is inspected. Now, that doesn't mean a rehab project or anything like that, but anything where there's a mortgage and a rent and things like that involved. So on a regular basis, in accordance with your policies, at least yearly. Now, dependent upon your staff, I have seen places that start off with the brand new tenant and they'll go every month or every 3 months. Okay, that's 4 times a year. And then, if they're successful, if they go through once, they go through twice, maybe on the 3rd time, they'll say, okay, we'll go bi-yearly. And then they'll go to that schedule. Then they'll finally graduate to yearly. And then the minute that something goes wrong, they go more frequently. Because you got to protect that asset if you have the staff, or you don't have very many units. That's another way also. But it's a good way, and then you can find out if perhaps your tenants need a little bit of counseling or guidance in the area of upkeep. When they're young, maybe they didn't have a mom in the house. Maybe, dependent upon how the situation was, they were never given the skills to know how a house is supposed to be kept, what a fire hazard considered, so you have the opportunity to also, and the duty actually, to make sure that they understand that and how to maintain those properties. And you go through that in the lease process also to assure the family is in compliance with, that lease or their particular agreement. Your collections policy is one of the most important of your A&O, and you need to follow it. Blank face, regardless. Everything happens and bang, bang, bang. Doesn't matter who's on the other end of it. One of the things we did is our staff members, and we would tell them when they would get hired on the staff, if you should be a member or you should be a participant in one of our programs, you are not allowed to be late. And then it also applied to our tribal council, because that's who I served under. Why? Because they're your grievance board, or they're the examples that, are going to be working with those tenants. And I try to teach that in Board of Commissioners and the Tribal Council classes that I teach. Make sure that you are not allowed to take that position, as a Board of Commissioner. If you're not following your lease yourself, you're the grievance committee. You have to be the point of example. So there's things like that. So your collections policy should state when, where, how your payments are made. If and when a late fee will be applied. A late fee is a good reason to encourage your tenants to pay on time. It might be only $10, $15. That $15 will make me move a little bit faster if it's going to get tacked on if I don't have it there by, the 10th of the month or whatever day it is. Calculate your payments according to your policy. Make sure that A&O policy is up to snuff. The family cannot pay more than 30% of their adjusted income for the rent or homebuyer payment. If payments are required by a program policy, you are supposed to collect them, okay? That's a large source of your revenue, as well as, the money that you get from the formula. Recertifications, you're supposed to recertify your NAHASDA tenants at least yearly. Why? Because you have to be able to prove that you're not charging them over 30% of their income. And when they come in and they do their monitoring, I've seen them, do a 3-year period, which is the norm, the prior 2 years and the current year. And then they go backwards if they have findings. And I've seen them go back multiple years till they could have a good trail. Okay, this looks like the last time they did research for everybody, especially during the COVID period. So make sure that your recertifications are up to date, especially before your audits and your HUD monitoring, okay? It's to update that family information, properly make sure their payments are calculated. Maybe somebody lost a job, maybe somebody got a job, maybe somebody gets overtime every single week, and you didn't put that in that initial calculation. the re-verification of family income, composition, assets, those allowances, and to make sure, most importantly, you are not charging them over 30% of that adjusted income. Try to always start 60 to 90 days before you need to do your research and your inspections. We're going to be coming around. Send a little letter out. We'll be out in June. We're going to be doing our inspections. We're going to be doing our research in March. Let them know, hey, welcome to the new year. Start out with that. In anticipation, here's your packet. We got snow still here. A couple of snowbanks out there, one up to my knees and, a shadowy part of my yard. We wouldn't do our inspections until all of the yards are clear. So we could see, if we had to tell the tenants, you need to pick this stuff up. So until we could walk around the yards comfortably, that's when we would do the inspection portions. The research, you can do them on a yearly basis. Somebody's always doing them that way usually, or you can do them all at once. I like doing them all at once because you kind of get in that mode. And you supply a list. This is what we're going to need this year for your visit. Make it as easy as you can, for them. Start early, like I said, and give them that warning. So your maintenance, the rental housing, the responsibility, you're responsible for the maintenance of your rental units. They're, as a tenant, responsible for the damage, not, the wear and tear. So if it needs to be painted, after they've been in there 5 years, well, paint it. Whatever you got to do. You wouldn't charge them that when they moved out. If it's because they've been in there 6 months and they smoke like a fiend, well, maybe that would be considered wear and tear. Those are discussions and things you need to have. The homeownership units, it's the family's responsibility, but because we had the ultimate responsibility in the end, and we don't have a lot of, construction handyman people around here that, you can't, it's not like when I'm in Florida and there's a listing for 6 handyman that'll come. Well, that's not how it is here. So we would have the hourly fee and basically a rate of charts. This is how much it's going to cost. We're going to charge you for the materials and maybe $20 an hour to fix this. This is the estimated time. And our mutual, our mutual help, our maintenance staff will be happy to do that. Schedule a time to come in and fix that for you. And things like screens getting punched out and blinds, because we didn't allow blankets in the windows. We would tell them, it's going to be $15 to replace that. We'll be over and I'm going to add it to your bill. Don't let yourself get behind because you got an extra $15 on there. And you do that to them a couple of times and mom's going to start making sure that the kids quit doing that. But we have, some of the nicest units around. So it was because of that. So damages are always the family's responsibility, regardless of that unit type. You, as a housing authority or entity, can make the repairs. The family should be required to pay for the parts and the labor, though. Okay. If it is a result of damage. Now, if it's not, you can do that. Mutual help, it's a little bit different. Depends on if it's a warranty item or what. Now, NAHASDA requires funds to be budgeted for maintenance and operation of your units. Now, I said, earlier, your A&O policy is one of the most important policies you'll have. Well, one of your biggest expenditures you're going to have in housing is going to be your maintenance and the staff, all of those things. That's going to be one of the biggest chunks you got. You have to make sure that if you have 1937 Housing Act, that current assisted stock, those need to be your top priority. That's what they're worried about most because they're paying the subsidy on them. Units developed, acquired, managed, assisted, or maintained with block grant funds are referred to as NAHASDA units. So you have different types of maintenance. They should have different response times. Hopefully you guys, especially if you're new, look and check out and see what kind of maintenance policy you have adopted. You have routine maintenance, preventive maintenance, emergency maintenance, repair requests that affect, health and safety. And then you have non-routine maintenance. Your current assisted stock, that CAS unit maintenance, requires all units developed under that 37 Housing Act to have funds allocated for operation and maintenance. The funds allocated for that activity are reduced during your program year. You actually have to amend your IHP. That is the only reason that you have to amend your IHP, unless you want to add an activity. But if you reduce the amount that you have scheduled to take care of that current assisted stock, you have to notify them and amend that, and then tell them why. So that part's, like I said, they're very picky about that. Your current assisted stocks units are managed under 2 eligible program activities: modernization of the 1937 Act housing and operation of the 1937 housing. So your NAHASDA unit maintenance should be a separate program activity for your operation and maintenance of those units in your IHP. The budget should be separated for those different types of activities. Reducing the amount spent on maintenance of a NAHASDA unit does not require an amendment, only a budget adjustment. So your move outs. After a while, it was like, I would have these conversations when I wouldn't give them their full security amount backs with my tenants. Is that the way that you received your unit? No. Well, why would you think that I would accept it that way? Is it my job to get rid of all of your garbage and to clean your fridge and to wipe out your, things like that? And they'd say, well, then that's why you're not getting back all your money. So I started thinking about it, and I'd ask around, and you guys got a move out procedure that you give your tenants, and nobody did. So I wrote one. So, it should require a 30-day written notice within your policy. You need to conduct a move out inspection, and that unit is supposed to be close to the way they received it, its original condition, except minus the wear and tear. If the carpet's all beat down and it needs to be painted, that's wear and tear. Now, if the fridge is filthy and full of food, that is not wear and tear. Okay. There's certain things that your boys know the difference. And the people that do those inspections, the family pays for the damages, but not the wear and tear. So I created a move out procedure. We were happy to have you as a tenant, and then we're sad to see you go, but in an effort to make your move out process go smoothly, and to maximize the amount of your security deposit required, please follow these guidelines. We'll try to process your deposit within 60 days of the receipt of your keys, saying we need to have those keys back. If you don't provide us with the following address, blah, blah, blah. And then I went through, what we're going to charge within the unit. Abandoned property, what we're going to do with that. We're going to dispose of it, and we're going to charge for the disposal of it. Don't come back 3 months later and say, hey, can I have the swing set? No, that's not the way it is. And then the procedure, and then the inspection, and dealing with that abandoned property. And then I went room by room. Kitchen, the refrigerator emptied of all food, the freezer defrosted, the unit cleaned inside and out. If you have a dishwasher, if you have a microwave, if you have your cabinets and drawers, wipe them out, emptied, shelves wiped down, remove the papers, the liners, the grease, the crumbs, the smudges. So it's a pretty big list. But that's how we give our units out. We would not say, and we'd have them, they'll come in there and they'll say, hey, it doesn't matter. You don't have to clean it. You don't have to paint it. We just need a place to live. No, you need to give all of your units out in the same way, which should be nice. So you can receive them all in the same way, which should be nice. Because it costs you money when it takes your guys time to bring them back up and prepare them for that next tenant. So general, bathroom, cleaning, exterior, and please, call all these departments and do this. And then again, the abandoned property. And then, of course, you have the signature pages. So that might help you reading for later on. You might have something like that. You might want to create something that mimics that, but that will help you in the long run with your participants. Okay. So when you move them in, tell them, please give us, 30-day notice, 60-day notice. And we got some paperwork that we'll go over with you and show you how we'd expect to receive our unit. So procurement is another area that you're going to have to oversee. there's requirements, standards, and there's different methods of procurement. I would, when you get as a new director, there is so much that you have to learn. I usually start out telling you, our HUD programs are one of the most heavily regulated programs the tribe will offer. I tell the council that all the time. They need to know. And you as the executive director are responsible for learning at least, every aspect of it and overseeing whoever's responsible for it. And a lot of times it's you. So when you get time, you also need to, take a procurement class so you have an idea about that. There's methods of procurement that are also governed by the Book of 200, as I call it, and the different types. We have micro purchasing, small purchasing, sealed bid, competitive, non-competitive. HUD doesn't like that one. Methods. So this will give you a little bit of an overview, but when you settle down, you should have a procurement class. You should have an admissions and occupancy class. You should take a NAHASDA essentials class. And a lot of them are offered here. But it's really important that you get a grasp on that. Even if you're not doing it, you have to be to know what you're overseeing. So your procurement, 24 CFR Part 1026, Section 7B of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. Remember the Indian preference we talked about earlier in the week. And then again, those uniform guidance for our federal awards, that 2 CFR Part 200, govern our procurement. Sections 200, 318 through 326 pretty much describes what you should have within your procurement policy. I believe there's one in your reference materials also, a sample one. Plus there's another guidance in there that you can update, but it'll show you, some of those areas. You have to look at those thresholds, make sure that they're compliant, things like that. So your applicable procurement standards, the methods of procurements that you're allowed, specific items that have to be included in your contracts under our federal awards. And that replaces 24 CFR Part 85. So if you see any of the policies that you have that refer to 24 CFR Part 85, that's another one, or one of the A numbers. You know that you have to update that policy. So the procurement under 318 to 326, the purchases have to comply with your tribe's documented procedures or your housing entities. It depends on which one you're under. Sometimes you'll have two totally different ones and you could have higher thresholds because you do more building. They could mimic each other, it's sometimes fun to compare them. So your procurement records have to be maintained sufficiently to detail the histories of your procurement. Clear, legible writing in a good filing system. When you take procurement, there's like sample procurement file setup and things like that, where you can go, I'm sure I've taught that on here, you can go in there and at least grab that document. Rationale for methods of procurement, your selection of the particular contract type that you utilized, your contractor selection or rejection. You always have to make decisions regarding the contractors that you're going to use. You have to deem them, there's language that you use that you have to make sure about your contractors and the basis for that contractor price. Provide for procurements under your small purchase threshold. You must consider your most economical purchase option. Purchases are supposed to be necessary and reasonable. Prohibits the use of a state or a local geographic preference. And to the maximum extent practicable, that wording is no longer included within the language of 200. So you have to practice full and open competition. So your non-federal entity, and what I was getting to about what you have to deem them, you have to deem them responsible and responsive. Your contractors, every single one of them, you have to make that determination that they're, capable of doing what you're asking them to do. So your non-federal entity must use its own documented procurement procedures, which are going to reflect your applicable state, local, tribal laws, regulations, provided that procurement conforms to the applicable federal law and the standards identified within this part. So you have to have a contract administration system, a written code of conduct governing the grantee or sub-grantee's employees to make sure they're not letting them other bidders know who's bidding, what is part of the bid package. This is how much money we put aside for paying. You know, they can't share that information. You have to be very, very clear. You know, they can't be opening bids. That your staff know how to deal with procurement also. Procedures in place that avoid purchases of unnecessary or duplicative items. Your grantees are encouraged to use federal access and surplus property. Poor Brooke, I had her changing stuff Monday morning before day one because there is an updated reference material on that. That just came out last week. And that is reference material 22 for your reading pleasure. And it talks about our use. We're allowed to use GSA. The tribe has always been allowed to do that, but your housing entity can purchase under there also. And you have to make sure that your vendor is not on the federal excluded parties list. You have to make sure they're not debarred or suspended and keep proof of that. So you almost have to take screenshots, print it, put it in a file, and do that periodically with, you know, almost every contractor that you use. So your general procurement standards, you have to have records detailing the significant history of a procurement, including at least the rationale for the method of the procurement, the selection of the contract type, the contractor selection or rejection, and the basis for that contract price. There we go. It must include a process for you as a grantee to settle any type of contractual or administrative issues arising from a procurement, a protest procedure, procedures to ensure awards are only to responsible contractors. A lot of the common monitoring findings that HUD will find is you didn't use fair and open competition in awarding professional service contracts. No method of applying Indian preference, inadequate or no procurement policy or procedure. Actual practices are inconsistent with what your adopted procurement policy says you're going to do. Therefore, you have to make sure that you become familiar with your policy and make sure that you understand it and the staff understands it. There's lots of things when you get to procurement, you know, those purchase orders, they're almost a contract. Who's allowed to sign them? Can just your head carpenter sign them or your head maintenance guy? Or will he allow another guy to go sign them? If you do a lot of purchasing with somebody else, do you have a blanket purchase agreement? You know, there's a lot of components to procurement because maintenance uses a lot of supplies also. And that's one of our biggest expenditures. So make sure somebody's trained in that. Okay. So common, again, records not maintained, no documentation, lack of cost or price analysis. We're supposed to do that with the majority of the things that, you know, we bid on. Small purchases not in accordance with the regulations, your conflicts of interest, you know, and or no policy, and professional services. Your attorneys, your accountants are not procured properly. Your auditors, you have to be careful there also. So your goals for your procurement activities is to obtain your highest quality for a reasonable price. Comply with those requirements. Remember the Indian preference requirements. Those are always present. Maintain documentation on everything. Facilitate delivery, understand the process, and implement a planning process. So you're not just, you know, okay, let's buy this today, you know. Your basic steps for all your procurement, you know, you solicit bids, proposals, price quotes. You always do your cost and price analysis unless it's a micro or a small purchase. Establish those perimeters or have it within your procurement policy for your quality, your price, your scope of work. They'll call that a SOW. Receive bids, proposals, price quotes, evaluate the bids, proposals, and price quotes, and then award the bid. You enter into a contract or a purchasing agreement. Now, if you're getting into building and you haven't done it before, you hire a good architect and engineer. Make sure they know you have to follow Davis-Bacon. Make sure that you have, they know that you have to offer Indian preference. You let them know those things up front because those have to be part of the bid package, and then learn from them. I know they look expensive, but one thing gone wrong and you'll wish that you've done it, and it'll save you that much money that you paid for them. But try to get somebody that's worked in Indian country before too. That will also help you. So some of those procurement requirements: HUD requirements accompanying our NAHASDA funding, recipient policies, tribal law, other federal and sometimes state law, depending on where you're located, and other agencies and lenders that are funding your program. If you're doing a low-income housing tax credit, or whatever that could be. Your reasons for a procurement policy: first of all, it's required. Okay, you don't pass go without one. 24 CFR 1026 and at 2 CFR 200-318 is where you're going to start to read about that. To ensure consistency in your procurement, establish your rules, your practices that don't conflict with the rules found at 318. Assemble, integrate those requirements imposed by others with your own requirements, and your tribe's policy should also be following 318 so they could mirror them. Check and see what theirs says. Maybe theirs is totally doable, just make sure you're compliant. There's many uniquenesses to tribal procurement, okay? It reflects the fundamentals of our government procurement because we're governed by that 200 document. And then you have the impact of our tribal situations. You guys all know what those are. And those geographic factors. If you're like me in the middle of nowhere, pretty much, our Walmart is 25 miles away. Then there's only like 5 stores there. Special circumstances, tribal laws, tribal political structures, your location, and those economic conditions. If you're from a very poor reservation, or if you're in a really wealthy area. I work on the East Coast. And it's really, really expensive to do anything there. I have a friend that was the executive director, in Martha's Vineyard. You can want to talk about expensive to do anything. Then you get up into Alaska. There's some poor areas there, but everything you do costs money because it's got to get flown and then shipped, or flown in. Those maintenance guys, my prior chair at the NAHSD board, when I was vice under him, they used to have to, fly their maintenance materials to their properties. If you forget your part, you're really in trouble. There goes another $600, so you have to really, really have your ducks in a row for some of them. So we have tribal requirements, tribal law, federally directed Indian preference, tribal licensing, tribal employment rights, organizations if you have taro on your reservation. I worked a lot at NIHC and testified a few times to get the Hearth Act passed that allows the tribes to adopt their own leasing ordinances. This is a picture when President Obama signed that into law. I got invited to go to the White House to see it signed. So right now, my chairwoman is in Washington fighting for our money, fighting for everybody's money. That's just, some of the things that we have to do to protect everyone. So we have those special legal issues, how our money comes down. It could get, cut off. You have sovereign immunity. There's oftentimes when you build, you will have to get what they call a limited waiver of sovereign immunity for some of your contracting. And you'll have to work hand in hand with your tribal government and your legal. Your trust land status, the tribal courts, who's got the court of jurisdiction if something goes wrong, those federal rules, those environmental rules. We are uniquely different. Our tribes are the same. Our programs are almost the same rules, but they're very, very difficult, and they're very different depending on, Alaska is different than one of our pueblos. Being on an island in a very wealthy portion of town is a lot different than, Pine Ridge. our rancherias are different than a great big land-based tribe, or the Navajo Nation, who's 4 states, where we're so different, but we're so alike under some circumstances. So it's different. And then those environmental rules that we all have to follow, and we're supposed to do that before we spend anything. Another area, as a director, you're going to have to learn that. And then you have, as the res turns, as you started the very first day, you can never predict what's going to come through your door or what's going to happen when you answer your phone. And your to-do list might be like mine. It's 2 pages long for this week. And you might not get to scratch off any. That's just what we get with our job. Tribal politics. You have self-employment, things like that. My fishermen, okay, we have fishermen here. They don't pay taxes. How are you going to figure out how much to charge them for the rent? It was like bargaining sometimes. Come on, if you would have made, only that amount of money, you would have started working at McDonald's. You got to give me a little bit more than that. And that's what I'd have to do with some of them. Or you would have to make it so they had money coming in. Your low rent tenants, when it comes time to draw unemployment or things like that, they don't have access to internet, and some of them don't have phones. So we would do that for them. Come on into the housing authority. We'll help you file your unemployment. Make the things as easy as you can so they can pay their rent. You'll have your staff say, that's not our job. But guess what? Your job, my chairman used to say, is to build a community. That house is the basis of that community. Make it as easy as you can for that family. Give them as many chances and opportunities as you can. Your staff are going to know how much the income of your tribal members are. Once they start working them, you'll have staff that have been there that can blink, blink, blink. They make that much, they make that much, they make that much. Okay, put that to work. How much is it for the commodities? How much is it for the low-income housing, credit for gas and electricity? You know what program, LEAP, I'm talking about. Do they qualify for this? If they qualify, have some applications on file and say, hey, I think you might qualify for this program. The more money you can pump into that family, the better off they are, and the more chances you are, and you will have of getting your rent. So lots of things, watch organizational conflicts of interest. There's different things that will apply. We have, isolated communities, limited suppliers, contractors, workforce, and in some cases like here, harsh climates. So our building season goes, from here in Oklahoma to here in Michigan. Alaska's even smaller, so all of that is different. We have benefits when you do it right. Proper procurement. You have cost efficiency, reduce your risk of getting in any trouble, any findings. Consistency, the more you do it, the better off you are, the more smooth out those wrinkles. Avoid outside interference, promotes competition, and you're compliant, hopefully. You got, as I said, those different methods of procurement. We utilize either micro purchasing, small purchasing, sealed bid, competitive, or non-competitive. They're found under 320. We use that bear claw as our example, your micro purchasing, the same ones that I just went through. Your standards are to have good policies and procedures. It's got to be reasonable and a necessary purchase. Should be a full and open competition. You should have no conflicts of interest present. You should have good documentation, cost and price analysis, and good contractor selection. So there is something called the de minimis procurement exemption that you can read about within your NAHASDA statute. It's a little bit confusing. And then it talks about it in the program guidance 2023-01, which is in your reference materials. The statute says, notwithstanding any provision of law, tribal employment contract preference laws adopted by an Indian tribe shall apply with respect to the administration of this grant. The guidance says micro purchase and de minimis exceptions are 2 different methods of simplified purchasing. However, Indian or tribal preference requirements will apply to all micro purchasing, regardless of the value, but will not apply to a de minimis procurement. That's how the language reads on that. So the exception found within the statute at 203, notwithstanding any provision of law, recipients shall not be required to act in accordance with any other applicable competitive procurement rule or procedure with respect to procurement using a grant provided under this act, so it has to be NAHASDA dollars, for goods and services the value of which is less than $5,000. So remember when I started out the very first day, if you were here, I said if it says you have to do something within the NAHASDA statute, you have to do it. It's a do not pass go. It was a law written by Congress. So when Congress writes a law like that and puts it into the statute, it overrides even the 200 documents. Okay, and it'll come back, and when they write it, they'll say, okay, but this part doesn't apply because it's NAHASDA funds. So you'll see that happen once in a while as you become more experienced with our language. Grantees have to adopt and follow procurement policies, procedures that comply with program requirements. You can develop policies that choose between the two options for purchases under 5,000 when their Indian tribes have adopted tribal preference requirements. Example, you might use a de minimis procurement amount up to $4,999. You might use a micro purchase between 5,000 and 10,000. So a micro purchase, the provisions of the clause allow recipients the ability to purchase without soliciting competitive quotations. If your procurement or contracting officer, and normally your contracting officer, you'll learn in procurement, is your executive director, considers the price to be reasonable. It's up to the grantee to implement micro purchase provisions, and it's a good practice to always document it. So your thresholds, what's a procurement threshold? It's at the point where something begins to change. You're allowed to do something if it's over this amount, or you're not allowed to do something under this amount. I said that opposite. But yeah, so your threshold might be $2,000. Anything goes under the 2,000. If it's above that threshold, you have to take the following steps. So those are your thresholds. So your purchasing a lot of the time is dependent upon your price. And you can read about that at PIH 2023-01 in your reference materials. If it's between 10,000 to 50,000, it's micro purchasing, no solicitation required. Price must be reasonable. And the reason it's like that is because this particular guidance will allow the tribes to go up to $50,000 and have higher thresholds. If you do self-certifications, your audits are all in order. It's not a one and done. HUD has to approve it. But if you do a lot of building and your ducks are in a row, you can actually raise a lot of your thresholds, okay? And it's all outlined in this document how you do it. Between 10,000 and 250,000 is considered a small purchase. You have to obtain adequate number of solicitations. Adequate is always more than one. Sweet spot is minimum of 3, okay? That's what you always shoot for. Get at least 3. More than 250,000, sealed bid. That's always usually preferred for construction, okay? And a competitive proposal is used when sealed bids are not actually appropriate. So there's procurement methods, the sample policy, the sample procurement policy put out by HUD and NIHC is in your reference materials at 23, okay? So micro purchasing, if the purchase is considered reasonable, you don't have to have a competitive solicitation if the price does not exceed $2,000 for a procurement that is subject to Davis-Bacon, which you're going to learn about later on. $10,000 for all of the procurement using federal funds or less if stated in your policy. Again, you have to read this 2023-01. That's the dealing with procurement and those raised thresholds. Small purchases, not more than your simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently $250,000. So you have competitive sealed bids, purchasing over $250,000. You have to use formal advertising, magazines, websites, newspapers, competitive proposals, purchases over $250,000 for services. You do an RFP. That's a request for proposals. A non-competitive proposal there's a change in there. You must request in writing if you're seeking permission from the awarding agency, which is HUD. What that means is if you can only get one person to bid, or you don't put something out for bid, that's considered non-competitive. They do not like it. Your maintenance guys, especially if they've been around for a while, will try to purchase like that. If they are above certain thresholds, they have to compete to purchase that. They don't allow non-competitive proposals. And HUD will turn you, I've been forced, actually, if I had more time, I'd tell you about it, to put things out for bid 3 times because I couldn't get bidders up here. There wasn't enough money to be made to have them mobilize and things like that. So 3 times before they would allow me to sole source it. So micro purchase methods, look at your reference materials. This is what I said, the 2023-01 document that you have to become familiar with. Changes the micro purchase and simplified acquisition thresholds. You can establish a micro purchase threshold up to 50,000, you know, based on certain conditions. You have to be compliant and HUD has to approve it. But that is the language if you guys want to do that and change your other thresholds there. That's up to you to read that. But like I said, it can be revised from 10,000 to 50,000. Micro purchases, if it's considered reasonable, you don't have to do a competitive solicitation. If your price does not exceed 2,000, subject to Davis-Bacon, 10,000 for procurement using federal funds, more if you actually did what, you know, we talked about in that program guidance and raised your thresholds, could be up to 50,000 in some cases. Applies to all purchases below your established threshold when a reasonable cost is available, documented with an authorized purchase order or other formal method. Purchases cannot be broken into smaller transactions to meet your micro purchase threshold. They call that bid splitting or unbundling. You can't do that. To the extent practicable, your non-federal entity has to distribute their micro purchases equitably among your qualified suppliers. So you'll see sometimes people will get dinged for that. If you've got 4 or 5 different places that you buy things from or that sell lumber or things like that, unless their prices are way out of whack or you have blanket purchase agreements, you're not supposed to focus just on one. You're supposed to buy from all of them, you know, by law. But there's your prohibition against bid splitting. Your contracting officer, your ED, whoever's in charge of the procurement, shall not break down requirements aggregating more than your small purchase threshold or your micro purchase threshold into multiple purchases less than that threshold. And they will call that bid splitting or unbundling to permit the use of that particular method of procurement because it's easier to do. You don't have to have as much paperwork. Oh yeah, we'll buy one this week and then we'll wait a month to buy another one. You know, they're going to want to see why you did that. So if you're up high enough, just be careful. So simplified acquisition thresholds mean the dollar amount which a non-federal entity can purchase property, services using your small purchase methods. Non-federal entities adopt small purchase procedures in order to expedite the purchase of items costing less than your, procurement threshold, your acquisition threshold. It is set by regulations at 48 CFR subpart 2.1. In accordance, the definitions as of the state, your simplified acquisition threshold is $250,000. It's periodically adjusted for inflation. You can get more information at 2 CFR 288 and 320. And then that's another reason you would turn around and look under the Deer Tribal Leader Letters section and your PG and your PIHs. You might see another saying, okay, you can use this higher threshold if you want. So your small purchase method, it's an optional method available when your procurement is less than the simplified acquisition threshold. So if you're under 250,000, you can utilize what they call small purchasing. It can be used to procure office supplies, vehicles, rehabilitation contractors, professional services, and equipment. Some of your principles, you apply it with your other bids, quotes, your request for proposals. It's less formal, has to be competitive. You can do it by fax, phone, email, writing, and you have to be bidding apples to apples, okay? You can't call and say, I would like a 4-wheel drive truck, and then call the next person and say, I would like a 4-wheel drive truck. Make sure it's got a Hemi in it. Call the third place and get a bid and say, I'd like a 4-wheel drive truck with a Hemi and a plow. And then the last person you call say, I would like a 4-wheel drive Dodge truck with a Hemi and a plow. You have to be same thing. And the minute that you deviate from that, you have to rebid it all over again. So it's really good that they have a script basically, and they go down the script. Now, one of the things with a procurement officer, you have to make sure that you know how to read what they're doing, that writing is legible, and that it's filed. They can pull up everything and understand it. Your test, especially in your monitoring, is for somebody else to be able to go through there and make sense of what they've written, where it was, how it's filed, all of that, okay? Do that during your self-monitoring, because they might not be there by the time the self-monitoring comes around. Establish your thresholds within your procurement policy and follow it. So your key elements, you don't have to publicly advertise. You need to have an adequate qualified number of bidders or proposers. Remember, 3. At a minimum, use a written checklist in your solicitation so every bidder has the same information and you can't add on. Your key elements, you can do it, however you want. You can compare websites. You can do it by fax, phone, and mail, or in person. If the solicitation is conducted by phone, the questions have to be uniform, consistent for all potential bidders. I should rewrite this slide because it should be consistent no matter which way you do it. By email, in person, or by phone. You can't divide those large contracts into award, smaller contracts. Any lack of competition requires HUD's written approval based on the regulations at 1052. So you're awarding contract only to responsive and responsible bidders. You deem them that. A reasonable price may not always be your lowest bidder. You might have somebody else that does things like that all the time, and you get a lower price out of somebody that's first time out of the box. They tried to build 80 units. Your comfort level might be with the one that does it timely all the time, that you know that you're going to have no problem with, and you might award it to them. So they might not always be your lowest bidder. Always use appropriate contract forms and methods after obtaining legal advice, okay? So I always ask tribal councils when I work with them, if you have legal staff, can your housing authority use them for free, please? It's expensive. We don't need to, take that away from housing our people to pay legal fees. And I do the same thing with the environmental. I ask them, if you have environmental staff, can they help the housing authority? So your subcontractor, your contractor qualifications, duties, responsibilities. This is from our tribe's procurement language. Procurement shall be conducted only with responsible contractors, those who have technical and financial competence to perform, who have had a satisfactory record of integrity. Before awarding a contract, the housing entity shall review the proposed contractor's ability to perform the contract successfully, considering factors such as the contractor's integrity, including a review of the list of parties excluded from federal procurement and non-procurement programs published by, GSA. That's a requirement. Compliance with public policy, record of past performance, including contacting previous clients of the contractor, financial, administrative, and technical capability to perform contract work of the size and type involved and within the time provided under the contract. I've seen people that do enough bidding that they put a per unit, per day contract penalty on their products that they want built. Depends on how often you do it. If a prospective contractor is found to be non-responsible, a written determination of non-responsibility shall be prepared and included in the procurement file, and the prospective contractor shall be advised of the reasons for our determination. So that's, possible language, but you should have things like that. Competitive sealed bid methods. What's a sealed bid? Contractors submit the bid amounts, quotes, confirmed compliance with specifications, price is the sole factor, and a fixed amount. You award to your responsive and responsible bidder with the lowest price, okay? You apply preferences when they're feasible. Sealed bids are usually used for materials, equipment, and your building contractor, okay? That's what you normally use when you build units. Also called bid letting. Invitations for bid, an IFB, or a solicitation of quotes. Your specifications and invitations are very important. Depending on what it is, you get a professional to put those together. I would write my own RFPs for certain things. When it would get into documents like this, you hire the pros. Preferred method for conventional construction contract, including your labor cost. You publicly advertise unless it's a small purchase or cooperative purchasing is used. Most formal method of procurement that you will use, bids are publicly solicited from an adequate, remember 3 at least, number of bidders who are given adequate time to respond. So I see this mistake made a lot, or almost made. It'll take so long for them to get everything together at the housing that they're looking at deadlines because it's got to go out for this long, it's got to be published for this long, it's going to take this long for materials, and they'll try to shorten that bid time allowance. Those guys will come in and they will be writing those things out till the minute that thing goes out for bid. It's 3 o'clock, we're going to take the bid openings at that point, sealed bid, whatever. Right up until that point, because the price of lumber is fluctuating, the price of metal is fluctuating, the price of gas, the price of the utilities and the trucks that they need, if they have to buy more, it's going up, right now it's going to be like COVID times again, probably. It's going to be very interesting. It'll be hard. Use a professional. Give adequate time. 2 weeks usually at least for most bids, okay? Because they're complex when they get to this point. And watch your bid opening time, okay? I made my biggest mistake right there with that. Don't do it around the time your school buses arrive. I had a contractor that we invited to bid, and he put in a bid, and he got stuck behind a school bus, and I couldn't accept it. The bid opening was at 3:30. Something like that. And he got behind a school bus. So have them like at 1:30 in the afternoon, something like that. Okay. Don't make that mistake. Sealed bids, pre-qualifications. Try to pre-qualify contractors for Indian preference. Your data has to be maintained, periodically updated. You can't qualify, I've got 10 Indian contractors here that are all pre-qualified. Well, at least once a year, preferably every 6 months, you should be making sure all that information is still up to date. Data has to be maintained, updated to reflect the changes. You also have to have proof that you checked to see if they were debarred or suspended. Your sealed bid construction, you use a project manual. They cost a lot of money to put them together, and you never let your last one go under any circumstance, okay? Always keep that. Keep one set of blueprints, keep one manual that you refuse to let go of because they're very important. They're your front end documents. You can actually charge for those things because they cost so much to produce. Invitations, bid forms, special conditions, general conditions, technical specs, plans, and those drawings are all within those, okay? Has to be publicly advertised. It can be personally solicited, like I told you about. I had a guy that was working on one of our casino projects, was huge in Wisconsin. Hey, we're going to build, an 80-unit project. Would you be interested in mobilizing and coming in this way? Your guys are already used to working here. I know that you do that type of building. You can do that. Or your sister tribe just built a beautiful project and you've never worked with their contractor. You can invite them to come in and bid on yours. You try to get as many bids as you can. You can amend it and you can cancel it by what they call an addendum. And you can limit to a list of pre-qualified bidders. And I have done that in my time. The first 15-unit project I built for Mutual Helps, we used what they call an Alaskan Craftsman system. So it was designed in Canada. They used an R2000, and it's a special method of building that you're building actually an airtight house. So your builders have to know ahead of time there's going to be different costs, there's different methods. So we brought the people that, you know, had designed that system up here and had them in on pre-bid meetings to teach the contractors that were present. And you had to go to those pre-bid meetings to be able to qualify. They needed to know what that would entail. So you can do that also. Opening bids only at a designated time and place. Watch the school buses. Bids are sealed and open publicly. Okay, this is where it's really important for you to talk to your staff. I don't care if you're the one that always opens the tribal mail or the housing authority mail. You do not open bid documents. You need to tell the staff. You can't tell them who else is bidding. Those guys, they'll send in just a cutie, you know, to sit there and flirt with your girls. Who else has got a bid going out? Or did you get any other ones? You know, they will do that. And you can't have them. I've had to rebid things because somebody told them, you know, you got to sharpen your pencil. This and this guy bid. You can't do that. So I had to put the whole thing out and rebid it. You have to be careful. Make sure your staff, don't assume just because you've trained the front office people how to act. If somebody else, you know, takes over at lunchtime, make sure that they know that procedure. The more formal process for construction projects, read the bid amounts out loud, hold all bids under advisement. You make no decision. Every once in a while, you'll hear an engineer or your architect say the apparent low bidder is this person. You can extend your opening by addendum. But like I said, these guys change all of their prices right up until the minute that they turn them in sometimes. So you be careful when you change, you know, bid openings and things like that. That's why it's so important to hire somebody that's done that before or is very experienced at it. You'll look at it and it's like, that's a lot of money. It's worth it. Your bidders, your proposers, your contractors, your vendors, they have to, like I said, you have to deem them responsive and responsible. So I had, you know, contractors that could build me 10, 15 units all day long. When I went to bid for something that was 80 units, I had to have a different contractor. And I told them, you know, you don't have the workforce, you don't have the bankroll, and you probably can't get insurance that high. Those, you know, so you have to be careful and make that. So responsive is the bidder, the proposer, the vendor responding to all of your solicitation, provides all of the documents and information required by you as the recipient in that package. Responsible, the bidder, the proposer, the vendor has the capacity and the capability to perform the work and or provide the goods properly and on time. If I had more time, I would tell you about Indian preference and some of the problems backing up tradespeople, and had to let go of a tribal member after giving them 2 tries, you know. So competitive proposals methods. So that's how far we are from Canada. That's taken from our reservation. Those red lights are Canada and the water's frozen in between. So competitive proposals, the proposals include a list of evaluation factors, relative importance, a point scale, used for your goods, services, when price is not the only factor. The solicitation is your request for proposal. Those are normally used for architects, accountants, attorneys, developers, computer systems, consultants, banking services. Specifications might not be fully prescribed. Could be turnkey development. A lot of people aren't familiar with turnkey. What that means is I'm going to tell somebody I want a 2,000-foot 3-bedroom house built on those lots. And those are the specifications I give them. I could go a little bit more. You know, I want a roof load of this much. I want this thick of drywall. You give them your minimum specs and they turn around, they bid it, you accept it. And when they're done building, they hand you the key, turn the key over. That's how they used to do it years ago. at the time of the Mutual Help and, under the 37 Act. Acquisition of pre-built housing can utilize competitive also. You are comparing Jonathan apples to Macintosh. I'd like a computer system. I'd like it for 8 of my staff, a minimum of this size with this much RAM. I'm not saying I want a Dell. I'm not saying I want an HP. I'm just, those are the specs I'm going to put out on it. Well, they could come back and they'll say, well, we'll give you a 28-inch screen, an HP scanner printer, full virus protection, and the Windows package. That's what you're comparing there. It's Jonathan apples to Jonathan. It's not, I want a Dodge Ram, ... So you have to learn the difference between, all of those. So your competitive proposals, price is not the only factor. NAHASDA allows price not to be a factor in certain types of contracts, especially architects and engineering contracts. You can read about that at 2 CFR 320, okay? Your solicitation of proposals, you advertise publicly. Commonly fewer specs, often but not always includes a contract form. There's sometimes criteria or points in there, and you incorporate applicable preferences. So using your point system, everything, except certain preferences has a range of possible points. Make sure that, this is the time you would use your panel of 3 people that helped you with your other stuff. You asked them for Indian preference and things like that. You also use them, hopefully, to help with your bids. Individual and independent evaluations are recommended. Verify and evaluate your preferences. So this could be sample criteria with a point scale. Knowledge and experience of financial accounting standards for Indian housing programs, including but not limited to, 1026, 2 CFR 200, Subpart E, PIH Notice 2028, determining and using program income, so they know what that is. Under NAHASDA, generally accepted government accounting principles, are GAAP, up to 25 points. Prior experience in Indian housing programs, 20 points. Evaluation of performance of existing and formal clients, including evaluation from advertising. TDHE, if applicant has previously worked with a TDHE, we'll give you 15 more points. Evaluation of Indian preference, training, employment, and contracting. Indian preference and Indian-owned firms, 0 to 15, maximum of 100 points. So there's your possible point scale, which you publish also, okay? So opening and evaluating those proposals, it's best to open them all at the same time. It doesn't require a public opening. You assess each proposal, determine who's responsible, evaluate often using that point scale. You award to a responsive and responsible proposer with the highest number of points, whose proposal is most advantageous to you as a recipient based on your price and your criteria that you published in your solicitation. And then you have that competition. Your contractors who are involved in drafting specs, statements of work, RFPs, your invitation for bids have to be excluded from competition. They have too much prior knowledge. You can't allow anybody that works on preparing something to bid on it. No allowed overly restrictive requirements, no state, local, or tribal geographical preferences unless mandated or encouraged by the statute. Written procedures are required. Your pre-qualified list has to be kept current. Your non-competitive method starts with non. That means no. HUD doesn't like it. Okay. You could read about that at 320. The item is available from only a single source. That would be an allowable reason. There's a public exigency or emergency for the requirement that will not permit a delay resulting from a competitive solicitation. Your whole furnace goes down. It's 30 below. You have 20 apartments and you have to replace the whole thing. You don't have time to put it out for 2 weeks because 2 weeks time, you'll lose all your tenants. They'll all freeze and you'll lose all your water and plumbing systems. In that case, you really hope it's not a weekend and you call HUD. That's always when, first thing I would do is call somebody at HUD and tell them. Tell them what's going on. It's supposed to be done and approved in writing, okay? But the federal award agency pass-through entity expressly authorizes non-competitive proposals in response to a written request from the non-federal entity, or after solicitation of a number of sources, competition is determined inadequate. So that's what happened with the one I was telling you about. 3 times we had to put it out. And then that's what they deemed it. Non-competitive can be used in only extraordinary situations, often requires special approval from HUD, only when other methods are infeasible, and you have to document that reason for use. Then you're allowed to negotiate with the single source, provide preferences when feasible, and that cost analysis is required. HUD is going to want approval. They're going to want cost analysis. They can review your procurement materials, your prior to award of that contract, and written reasons why that award cannot be made through competition. Okay, so that's your quick, this is what I got to learn about procurement. Okay, guys, you got to learn about procurement. And then we're going to go into conflict of interest in many different places here. So in the administration of your contracts, and the definition of conflict of interest is the same, whether it be in your contracting or placing somebody in a home, okay? Or selecting applicants from a list, you know. When somebody in a position of trust has a competing professional and personal interest, when they make a decision in an official capacity, they stand to profit personally. When your interests have the potential to conflict with the best interest of the organization or those you represent. So it's addressed about contracting at 318. The non-federal entity has to maintain written standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest, governing performance of your employees engaged in the selection, award, administration of your contracts. No employee, officer, or agent, your board of commissioners, things like that, must participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by a federal award if they have a real or apparent conflict of interest. Could arise when they or any member of their family, their partner, or an organization who wants to employ or wishes to employ any of the parties that I just talked about. If they have a financial or other interest in a tangible personal benefit from a firm considered for a contract. Officers, employees, agents of your entity can neither accept gratuities, favors, anything of monetary value from contractors or parties to your subcontracts. Your entity can set standards for situations where that interest is, minimal, an unsolicited item of nominal value. Your standards of conduct must provide disciplinary actions, okay? So when we get to this part, you look and make sure you have something like that in your policies, okay? Because they will look for it. Your standards of conduct must provide for disciplinary actions for violations of standards by your officers, employees, agents of your entity, okay? So you're going to, most places have different amounts. It could be 25, 50, 75, 100, depending on where you're at. An employee shall not solicit, accept, or directly, indirectly, any gift exceeding $50 in value, a favor, a loan, anything of monetary value from a person or organization who has in the past or tends to seek to obtain a contractual business or financial relationship with your housing entity, who has interest, could be affected by the performance or non-performance, that could be your inspector, of the employee's official duty. This is what we wrote to allow them to accept a meal, at a conference, or pick up, these NWIHA to-do list or these Native Learning Center tablets at a conference. So employee can accept food or refreshments of a nominal value on an infrequent occasion in the ordinary course of a breakfast, luncheon, or dinner meeting, or other meeting where an employee may be properly in attendance, may accept unsolicited advertising materials such as pens, calendars, other items of a nominal value. Okay, that allowed us to do that without being, breaking the law. Your written standards of conduct require no employee, officer, agent can participate in the selection, award, administration of a contract if you have a real or apparent or perceived, conflict of interest. Conflict of interest when your employee, officer, an agent, member of his or her immediate family has a financial or other interest or a tangible personal benefit from a firm considered for a contract. So if you're putting out, you're going to fix up some of your housing units, your board of commissioners can't have a son-in-law that works for the paint company or works on a paint crew, a drywalling crew, anything like that. They have to recuse themselves. And when I say recuse, I don't mean push back. I mean, they can't be in the room. They have to have redacted minutes. They're not allowed to see that information or discuss it because of that perceived conflict of interest. You have to make sure that your board of commissioners know about all of that, okay? You have to maintain written standards of conduct with respect to organizational conflicts of interest. So your conflict of interest, you need a good policy. Your housing authority prohibits its officers, employees, and agents from participating directly or indirectly in the selection or in the award or administration of any contract. If you have a conflict, real or apparent, would be involved. It could arise when a financial or other interest in a firm selected for an award is held by, and this is where you have to have a really, really good definition in your policy of what immediate family is. Now, when this came down the line, and you'll see it when we get to this part about placing tenants, they wanted to use first cousin, and I was at the table at the time, and it is like, absolutely, you know how many first cousins I had by the time I was 12? It's like the Hawaiian Man on HGTV. I have 50 of them, That's how some of us are, depending on the size of our reservation. So do not, I would advise, use cousin in your definition because the definition of immediate family is big. Father, mother, son, daughter, brother, sister, uncle, aunt, nephew, niece, husband, wife, father-in-law, mother-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, stepfather, stepmother, stepdaughter, stepson, stepsister, half-brother, half-sister. That's the one used a lot, So that's a lot of people. His or her partner goes, don't have to even be married, or an organization who is going to employ or negotiating to employ or has an arrangement concerning prospective employment of any of those people. And then the gifts and gratuities, the housing authority prohibits its officers, employees, agents soliciting or accepting gratuities, favors, anything of monetary value other than those unsolicited items of nominal intrinsic value from contractors, potential contractors, parties to subcontracts, and the knowing use of confidential information for actual or anticipated personal gain. Now, I told you have to have it in writing, the violations. This is what we used. Look for something like this in your policies to make sure you have it. Disciplinary action will be taken to remedy violations of this code, may include verbal or written warning, formal reprimand, suspension, or dismissal. The level of the disciplinary action is going to depend on the severity of the violation, the individual's prior behavior, the nature of the individual's position. Notice that the housing entity communicates the requirements of this code during orientations, trainings, bylaws of the Board of Commissioners, and its personnel and procurement policies. So that's in contracting. Then you have it in admissions. So 318 governs procurement of supplies, equipment, property, construction, recipients, subcontractors. The Book of 1000, 30 through 36, 32, 34, 36, govern all the other cases. And then we have program guidance in your materials, your reference materials at 2002-13, governing the conflict of interest in admissions. If you do not have a procedure, you need to have a conflict of interest procedure, and you're going to have to take, some of the following steps. The posting is in the guidance, but it's back from the 2000s, so you're going to have to, change that PDF. You're going to have to alter the date within there. So you're required to report a potential conflict of interest to your EWONAP office. You're supposed to disclose it to the public, the nature of the assistance that you're going to provide the individual, and the specific base for which there is no conflict. It's to ensure fair and equitable treatment of all. You have to determine if a conflict exists. You disclose it to the public, report it to HUD prior to providing assistance. HUD can make an exception. If the family is low income and they qualify, it's not a conflict, but you still need to make the disclosure. If the conflict is only apparent or perceived, you make the disclosure and you inform HUD. So, hold on, Bob Louie. There you go. There's several ways to make the public disclosure. One is to make the information available in the same manner you would provide your other public information like your APR. Posting in a prominent place. Some programs have a public disclosure section in their monthly meeting agenda. HUD has to be provided a copy of your disclosure. If the recipient is a TDHE, it could be provided to the tribe as well. There's our program guidance that I was talking about that we have to follow. It goes all the way back to 2001. HUD was trying to find out basically how we were doing when we went from 37 Act to NAHASDA. So they went out and surveyed all across the United States, big, large, small, rancheria, pueblo, village. They wanted to see how we were doing under NAHASDA. The sixth area that they audited, the sixth finding basically, was among the housing entities reviewed, undisclosed conflicts of interest, preferential treatment in the admission to their housing programs. Over half of the entities had no process to ensure adherence to the conflict of interest requirements, or that their admissions were made fairly to eligible families, and that all members of your tribe or the tribes were treated fairly. Okay? Remember I told you, they always want you to treat everybody fairly. So those conflict of interest provisions apply to anybody participating in your decision-making process who gains inside information with regard to your assisted activities. Individuals could be your housing staff, your housing board, your tribal council, members of their immediate families, your business associates. The requirements prohibit those individuals from benefiting from their positions personally, financially, through the receipt of special benefits, other than the payment of salary or appropriate administrative expenses. It does not prevent your housing staff or your board or their family members and business associates from receiving housing benefits for which they qualify if they are a low-income individual. There are a couple of exceptions. To comply with those conflict of interest requirements, you have to have a set of procedures for determining when a conflict exists. You have to have a way to disclose that to the public as required by the regulations. And the policy should include a method of determining whether you have a potential conflict of interest. Do you ask in every application for every program that you offer if they are related to your decision makers? And your administrative steps for reporting your potential conflict of interest to your area office of Native American programs, and to disclose that to the public. The nature of the assistance to be provided to the individual, and the specific basis for which the selection of the individual was made. They were the next eligible participant on the list, is what I used to always use. There's exceptions to the requirements. HUD approval can be obtained. Usually the exceptions for HUD are contracting and things like that. And you do not see them I've only heard of one exception made in my time. So it doesn't happen a lot. All records relating to exceptions made to your conflict of interest provisions have to be maintained for over or at least 3 years after the exception has been granted. Now, we have to keep proof that our tenants are eligible at the time of admission. If they fall into the category of needing to make a posting and notify HUD, we would do so and keep that in their file forever, okay? Just to show that we did those steps. You don't want HUD coming in 6 years from now and doing your monitoring and saying, yeah, we did it, but we only kept it for 3 years. It's just easier to say, yeah, we did, and here it is. So low-income individuals to whom the conflict of interest provisions would normally apply, you know, your staff, your board members who qualify, don't fall under the category of an exception. EWONAP approval is not required to provide them with the assistance for which they qualify, okay? You still need to make the public disclosure before you help them. So as soon as you find out that they're the next one on the list, your crew's fixing up the house, you put up the posting, then you send it to HUD, and then you move them in. Just, you know, get your ducks in a row. The only exception is if the person that you are helping is between 80 and 100% and you have that threshold, and they are a member of your board of commissioners or your tribal council or your staff, you need to get HUD approval first, okay? Because of how much money they make. All your policies are supposed to be public. Copies should be available to the public upon request. Have to be in accordance with NAHASDA. You should have a procedure for determination of conflict of interest in your admissions, okay? What you're going to do, that you're going to make your postings. You define what your tribe considers immediate family within your policy. And then this is the notice that you would post. It's inside of that guidance. Specific basis for the selection, well, they're American Indian, they're Alaska Native, their low income is determined by HUD. It's going to be a primary residence, and they were the next eligible tribal participant on the list. And, you know, it goes all the way back to 2000 and, no, that one I redid. But you have to redo the date on the PDF in there if you don't have it. All of your applications for every program should ask if they have anybody in their family have a family or business relationship with an employee of the housing authority, any of the board of commissioners, or their tribal council. And you should have a conflict of interest statement, applicant disclosure, in all your application packages. I'm applying for the this housing program above, and I am declaring that I am an employee of the housing authority. I'm a board of commissioner, or I'm a tribal counselor. I'm an immediate family of housing employee, board of commissioner, tribal council. I am neither to all of the above. If you are a family member, a business partner, an employee, and a board of commissioner, tribal council, please state their name and your relationship. And then there's that acknowledgement. I understand that a public disclosure of my selection will be made. A copy of the disclosure shall be submitted to HUD. I've been notified of my opportunity to receive a copy of the conflict of interest policy, to receive additional information from the housing entity. And I understand that this disclosure does not disqualify and or determine my application ineligible. Okay. So make sure you have one. You also need written standards of conduct. Because the awarding of our money is federal funds, things are looked upon a lot differently. You have to maintain confidence that the housing recipient's procurement process is fair, that you have standards of conduct that are maintained all the time, and that your employees and your board members are, you know, carrying out their duties impartially to assure fairness. They have to conduct themselves in a manner to promote confidence in the integrity of your organization. Any attempt by an employee or a board member to realize any type of personal gain by conduct inconsistent with proper procurement should be a breaching of your housing, you know, standards of conduct. You should have confidential information disclosures and statements that your staff and board have to sign. Disclosure of any confidential information to any person not authorized by the contracting officer, who is normally your ED, to receive such information shall be a breach of ethical standards. Confidential information includes, but is not necessarily limited to, contents of a bid prior to a bid opening, a proposal prior to a contract award using a competitive proposal, names of individuals or firms that submitted bids prior to a bid opening, or a proposal prior to a contract award. And then the use of that information. TDHE generated information relating to procurement, including your cost estimates, contractor selection, evaluation plans, specifications before you issue your solicitation, any other information in which that disclosure would have a direct bearing upon the contract award or the competitive process. It is a breach of ethical conduct for any current or former employee, officer, or agent to knowingly use confidential information for actual or anticipated personal gain, or for actual or anticipated personal gain of any other person. And you should have a confidentiality policy protecting your residents and your applicants. Basically saying that it's personal information. It's mandated by HUD confidentiality requirements to protect the tenant information and your records. In all cases, the release of records require prior written approval of the Housing Authority Executive Director. A lot of times I've seen people put and or the housing tenant. Let it be resolved that this policy of the Housing Authority to protect the interests of the people you serve by, the maximum extent permitted by law. All employees, members of the housing entity, including the commissioners and tribal council, are required to abide by these standards. Only inspectors, auditors, investigators, others who are engaged in their normal functions approved by the Department of Housing and Urban Development may have access to confidential information concerning your residents and applicants. So upon discovery of any actual or potential conflict of interest, employees, officers, commissioners, agents have to promptly file a written statement of disqualification. They have to withdraw from any further participation in the transaction involved. It's got to be entered into your meeting minutes of your board or the council also. Make sure. Grantees, subgrantees will maintain a written code of standards of conduct governing the performance of the employees engaged in the award and administration of contracts. No employee, officer, or agent shall participate in the selection or the award of an administration of a contract supported by federal funds if a conflict of interest, real or apparent, would be involved. It's the perceived conflict of interest that get you. No person who exercises any functions or responsibilities, for activities funded by the authority, who is in a position to participate in your decision-making process or to gain any type of inside information with regard to those activities, obtaining a financial interest or a benefit from any housing entity's assisted activity, any interest in any contract, subcontract, or agreement, for themselves or who they have family or business ties during their tenure or for 1 year after. I have the language in there later on. It was required under most circumstances early on in the 37 Housing Act that you had that language, and a lot of tribes put it back after that point. If you work for the Housing Authority or you're on the Board of Commissioner, Tribal Council, for 1 year, you can't sell the Housing Authority land, property, things like that. Because that there's something coming, so it's a way to protect that also. So his or her partners, organizations who employs, or has arrangements concerning prospective employment, that's who it's covered by. So you should have all those things in place. Make sure that your Board of Commissioners and your tribal council get trained on all of that, and code of ethics, and they should be signing them, your code of ethics, definitely your board. Listen carefully to your board members who served, by your housing entity. Respect the opinion of your other board members. Respect and support the majority decisions of your board. Realize the authority is vested in the board when it meets in legal session, not with individual board members. Keep well-informed of developments, relevant issues that come before the board. Participate actively in your board meetings and actions. Call to attention the board any issues that could have an adverse effect on your housing entity and those you serve. Attempt to interpret the needs of your constituents of your housing entity. Interpret the actions of the housing entity to your constituents. Refer, any complaints to the proper level of the chain of command. Recognize the board member's job is to ensure that it's well managed, not to manage your housing entity. Vote to hire the best possible person to manage your housing authority. represent all constituents, not solely a particular geographic group or a special interest group. Consider yourself a trustee of the housing entity. Do their best to ensure that they are well maintained, financially secure, growing, operating in the best interests of your constituents. Always learn about the board member's job, how to do it better. Declare any conflict of interest between your personal life and the position on the board to avoid voting on issues that appear to be a conflict of interest. And then it's, goes on to some of the things that they shouldn't do. Be critical in or outside of the board meeting of your other board members or their opinions. Use the housing authority any part for personal advantage or the advantage of friends or relatives. Try to influence the decision of the ED or their staff or other board members regarding placement for a home or a program for your friends or family. Discuss confidential proceedings of your board meeting outside of the board meeting. Promise prior to a meeting how they're going to vote on any issue in the meeting. Interfere with the duties of the executive director, undermine the executive director's authority, or be involved in any type of self-dealing that provides personal gain. So it's really important that you have policies and procedures like that, and that they get some type of training on them, your staff as well as your board. And then your policies should address all of these things. So your policies, also have to have elected by formal resolution, and your tribe should adopt all of these. The purpose of the policy is to establish ethical requirements, and conduct of your board and the tribal council and your staff. Talks about waivers, tribal ethical requirements, conflicts of interest, current tribal council members, who serve as a liaison, prohibited from entering, proposing, or having a contract, any type of financial interest, direct or indirect, with your housing authority, the property, or, your activities. And it can be waived, by the tribal council if, you've acquired something prior to the beginning of your tenure. The interest has to be immediately disclosed, waiver set forth, and the things you have to do to actually get a waiver. So you should have, things like this governing your employees, and a period of 12 months after termination of employment before they're allowed to do things. And, no employee, tribal council member, board, commissioner, agent of the housing authority shall participate again within decision, selection, award of contracts. By appearance of the tribal council, board, employee, agent, any member of their immediate family, because of the conflict of interest provisions, including participating in the decision-making, the selection, and the award of the administration of those contracts. Refraining from viewing, retaining any related materials means not using any housing authority position to influence the decision in which you have a personal interest. So it's really important that they know that. Even if they're a tenant, they give up some personal things when they take that role as a board commissioner. Especially during COVID, I saw times where there was boards that would offer programs on a first come, first served basis. And their board members were some of the first served. And I said, that's a conflict of interest. You give up certain opportunities because of the fact that you're sitting in that board seat and you're receiving that stipend in certain cases also. You would be served last. You can't have prior knowledge, so you need to make sure that they're trained on that. And it puts you as an executive director in a very awkward position sometimes, because of the fact that you're almost telling your bosses how you're expecting them to behave. And Deborah, later on, make sure that's often on your resource center there. But in your question, if you could slide a message into me, can you certify what? And if you mean your tenants every 3 years, no, you have to recert at least once a year. So if it's something else, write it in there for me though. Gifts, you have to decide if they're allowed to take gifts and what amount. Now, we would have tenants that would be grateful that, we went through and while we were mowing, we took care of their yard or whatever. And they would do things, we would tell them, you can do things on behalf of the whole staff. And they would make, 2 dozen cookies, and they would go in on the break room table, and they would benefit not one specific person, but everybody. We allowed things like that because, as a person, when they gift you, we're really not supposed to turn it down. So those are the ways that we would tell them that they're allowed to, thank us. Bake a pie for everybody, 1 pie, 2 pies, enough for the whole staff, whatever you got to do. So gifts should be recorded in writing by your officer employee and routinely disclosed to the housing authority when you get things. So you got to be careful there. Donations, you can solicit and accept donations for your programs. All solicitations and donations should be open, public, recorded, not for the sole benefit of the housing authority, not for the employees, contractors, board members. No donation should be solicited or made while the party donating is seeking to be considered for a contract, okay? No donation shall be considered or accepted if it would influence the award of a contract or give the appearance of that possible effect. So you got to be careful there. And gifts and payments, shall accept gifts and money from a tenant, things like that. You got to make sure that it contains language such as that. And your confidentiality requirements. Make sure that you have those in there. Political activities prohibited. We even put a sign up during tribal elections. Please visit my staff at home. They, would be happy to hear from you and what you, would like to offer, but do not come to the housing authority during working hours and, seek time to talk to the staff about that. I'd have them come in and try to plunk down for hour and a half. You can't do that. They're on the clock for me, basically. So you can't. And then those fiduciary responsibilities. Your commissioners have that responsibility to take action to do what is in the best interest of your housing authority. You should have them also follow your drug and alcohol policy and sign something, and disclosures, and who they can actually, if you see a violation of the policy, who you go through to tell them. No retaliation or other punitive action should be taken, from the people that disclose it. So there's a lot of good language for you to read later on, okay? And board member involvement, tribal involvement, they're separate organizations, but I've seen places where they were running for council and they came in and took poster board and pens and things like that from the housing authority. And the executive director was scared to tell them, no, you can't do that, That's our materials that we bought with those monies. I said, well, you need to tell them that, but they were tribal councils, so they were scared. You put this stuff in writing and have them sign it. And then, you have no choice but to disclose it because it's wrong. The requirements contained in the policy shall apply to the housing authority grantees, contractors, and it should be, when feasible, put into your types of contracts. So I ran 15 minutes over again, 17 minutes technically, and I apologize, guys. If you have any more questions, recertifications, we send a notice. You can't just ask. They have to be able to prove it, sweetheart, because I've had places where they went back almost 4 years, and it's really embarrassing when you as a housing authority have to come in and say, could you please provide me all your tax documents and everything all the way back to 2016? It puts you in a really bad place. So yeah, you do have to do that. And I'm so sorry. You do have to do that full recertification yearly. Okay. Please forgive me for telling you that, but you have to. You have to be able to prove that you're not charging them up, over 30% of their income.
Looks like somebody's maybe typing, so
Okay.
I'll just kind of go ahead and go through the outro while they're doing that. But thank you so much, Cheryl. Another incredible day. We got one more tomorrow, folks. We hope we see all of you there. I put the webinar feedback survey link into the chat. It is a different feedback survey for each day of the training. I didn't get any for yesterday. I was so bummed. So it'd be awesome if everybody who's on the call now could please do the one for day 4. We really, really appreciate it. The most I've seen it take, because I can see the timer, I can't see your names or anything, but I can see the timer. Most I've seen it take is 3.5 minutes. 3.5 minutes to help out your friends at the Native Learning Center, to help out Cheryl, and give us feedback that helps us continue to improve so that we can serve you even better. So you're helping you too.
Thank you, Deb.
Hopefully you're so moved by my speech to do the feedback form. But we hope we can see you for day 5. That's going to be tomorrow, same time, same place. So 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. That'll be the final day of the training, the conclusion. So we hope you can tune in for what's going to be a fantastic end. You will be able to catch the recordings of these on our YouTube channel. It takes a minute to generate, but we do post them there, and they're also linked on the learning platform here. So if you go through that executive director training course, you can see the recordings as well as all those helpful reference materials that Cheryl has put together for you. They're all linked on various pages in the course. You just have to click through the arrows to see. We hope you can check out our upcoming training events. We post about them on all our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. If you are a podcast listener, we have one for you to check out, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. We produce that in-house. And if you like to watch your podcast interviews with special guests, then you can catch that on our YouTube channel as well. There's a whole playlist, Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. But other than that, that is all we have for you on this fine Thursday, folks. It looks like you have another question in there, Cheryl.
Nope.
Oh, never mind, it's a comment.
Yeah, I read it.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording because we are all done, but I will